Hello everyone, this is Jowayreyah Ming. Today I will be presenting my paper titled as Player Immersion in the Interactive Narrative of Video Games, a Multimodal Discourse View to The Witcher 3 as a Case. Jumping right into it, as we know, one of the many ways mankind has passed knowledge and experience through is storytelling. Through various forms and process of interactions, stories have always been passed around between people. They're told, heard, performed, and altered through generation. But with the emergence of mass modern media, storytelling has been enabled to be interactive. So, we can say that interactivity begins where interaction ends. Interactivity could be defined as a characteristic of a medium in which the user can influence the form and/or content of the mediated presentation or experience. Because of that, we can say that one of the most prominent media realization of interactivity is video games. The underlying technology of video games allows an incorporation of all major presentational media such as spoken text, written text, as well as all kinds of sounds and images, both still and moving. And that's why video games are considered as an interactive storytelling medium, as they allow their player to live off a narrative and experience a unique type of fictional story world. In video games, interactivity is enacted through a modulated block structure. It is a nonlinear branching structure which entails a branch and bottleneck decision trees. That is to say, the player path is drawn along the tree as accustomed to the decisions the player make at the narrative progress. Yet, the tree's branches converge at certain points to keep a general storyline in progress, even with the deviation of events and several endings. This is implemented within video games narrative through interactive cutscenes, where the player is given agency to determine the path the narrative will follow depending on the player's choice between a set of options. As we see on the screen, the player is given a set of options throughout an interactive cutscene, and each option will result in a different cutscene. Thereby, we can say that the interactivity of video games is the ability that grants players agency. This agency could be identified as the user's free spatial navigation and sense of free will, which is conveyed through performing virtual embedded action. This sense of agency is what consequently contributes to the player's immersion. So, the player's sense of immersion is built upon the agency the player has to explore the virtual world of video games in order to understand what sort of semiotic system it is. The semiotics mode, which the game content is composed of, are the meaningful cues, with the game's images, sounds, words, and possible action, their possible combination, things that the game's code and rules give rise to, can be used to signify in a specific context of gameplay for specific goals and purposes. These semiotic modes are the meaningful cues which a player interprets as the gameplay progress to grasp the semiotic system of the narrative virtual context of the game as a necessity in order to successfully complete the game. All things considered, this study sheds light on the role of interactivity as it is depicted within the narrative choices in video games. This study aimed to trace the unfolding process of the narrative throughout investigating the multimodal components and semiotics mood each interactive cutscene lay out to the player to interpret. Alongside examining the narrative options and deviation, this study aims to relate the way each option correlates with the player immersion within the context, as each semiotic mode interferes with the player's decision and perception of the narrative. When it comes to literature review, here we have some related studies. As we see, some studies involving video games, using different methods of course, examine the way players engage with the virtual narrative content of the game world and how they build a rapidly accumulating knowledge throughout their gameplays. Each study, of course, had a different purpose. For example, the first study we have examined the influence of the player's character's alignment and knowledge on their in-game behaviors. The next study examined the way the semiotic structure and design of the game motivates player agency emotionally and, more important, ethically as morally. And in addition, a rather larger number of studies aim to conceptualize the literacy practices and learning affordance in digital games, as the last study in the table shows. However, this study aims to analyze the way the linguistic, along with the multimodal semiotic resources, interfere with the player's choices, leading to completing the game to understand the way interactive narratives are practiced. To achieve this study takes into account a rather larger and an open-world game with more complex narrative structure, which is The Witcher 3. In The Witcher 3, players are given a set of response options where their decisions are either essential to the gameplay experience or critical to the narrative experience. The game projects its most impactful choices where the protagonist, Geralt of Rivia, determines the fate of his adoptive daughter, Ciri. On the basis thereof, upon the player's decisions, the narrative of the game will play off differently, leading to one of three extensive endings. The three endings are considered a good ending, where Ciri lives, a bad ending where she dies, or a neutral ending where she lives and becomes an empress. Each ending is triggered by a set of positive or negative ending points or decisions. Therefore, this study specifically limits its scope toward 5 critical decisions the game presents as determinant of the 3 endings. The 5 critical decisions are presented to the player through 4 interactive cutscenes, playing into a set of different 10 scenes depending on the player's decision in the given interactive moment within the cutscene. Under this light, the study aims to answer the following questions. How do the multimodal components of cutscenes offer choices for the player in The Witcher 3? And how could each option be meaningfully interpreted to interfere with the player's choices, leading to a certain ending? As the interactive cutscenes are highly multimodal, this study employs Halliday's systematic functional grammar along with Chris and Van Leeuwen's multimodal discourse analysis model system to analyze and examine the composition of meanings as employed in the analysis of the semiotic resources within the interactive cutscenes. The present study is concerned with examining the experiential and interpersonal metafunctions as they are both oriented towards the construing of experiences as the semiotic world of narrative and the enactment in the social world of narrative. The socio-semiotic system of the video game itself plays both the role of the medium and the main mean of player interactivity with the narrative. Hence, we can divide the components that comprise the multimodal semiotic resources of the video game into textual and visual resources or data. In the following section, we will represent an overview of the results of this study. The narrative within the 4 cutscene is represented visually with only 2 types of narrative patterns, action processes and reactional processes. The action process embodies the dynamic dialogic structure as it plays the main mean of communicating the narrative to the player, verbally and visually. And the reactional processes align with the action processes to connect and represent characters' attitude of acceptance or avoidance towards the situation as it is taking place within the context. The visual data analysis show a single recurring pattern in each interactive moment. In each, the narrative patterns transform into a transactional, reactional, or action process. The transactional structures are often bidirectional. The participants naturally take turns swapping between the role of actor and the role of goal, connecting both as interactors. As displayed in the images, a vector is formed by the eyeline of the represented participant, mainly Geralt, and directed towards the other characters. According to Chris and Van Leeuwen, the vectorial patterns is what represent the narrative, and the narrative patterns serve to present unfolding action and events, processes of change, transitory spatial arrangement. When it comes to the textual analysis, the experiential metafunction is realized by the prominent use of material and mental processes. The majority of the dialogue consists of material processes such as did not make, come, find, and do, and mental processes such as stop thinking, know, focus, and relax. Both processes conflate with one another to build up the experience of the narrative world around the player and characters as it corresponds with the inner world of the conscious of both. The outer domain of experience is experientially coordinated with the inner unconsciousness domain of experience as they project each other. Therefore, at this point, the player realizes with each cutscene the role they play and the impact of their choices on the order of events and the configuration of the narrative. In this way, the players will weight each decision they take because it will reflect on Ciri's developing experience and it will lead her towards a certain fate. Along with that, the configuration of process as it unfolds is specified with circumstances. Within the forecast scene, the prominent type of circumstances are circumstances of matter. They are projection circumstances. They project the clause relatively to its participants. As we mentioned, the outer and inner domain of experience project each other. So, here the circumstances as well project the ongoing experience as being construed in the configuration of the process in relation to the participant. At the same time, the experience is realized interpersonally as it looked at as an exchange. This is highly relevant to the structure of narrative in The Witcher 3, as the narrative is expressed in cinematic dialogue. The burden of the clause as an interactive event is carried by one constituent, which is the mood element. Among all the clauses, the predominating mood type is the declarative. So, as the experience is realized interpersonally as an exchange, the context of situation motivates the meanings of exchanging information. Each cutscene represents the situation as information to the player about the narrative itself and the socio-semiotic world of the game. According to the type of information the player receives, he or she is then expected to weigh their choices and proceed with their decisions. So, the characters convey the context of situation interpersonally through their choices of mood types, as each has defined semantic functions. Therefore, in the midst of each interactive moment within each cutscene, the players find themselves interpreting the use of language in terms of clause organization and the mood system to decide what they find best to each situation. For example, in this screenshot of the interactive cutscene, the player is represented with two choices. The first one, relax. It is voiced in an imperative mood type. The imperative mood implies using language to get things done or to demand a service, usually by giving order or instruction. Yet, a demand is not always passively responded to. Hence, in this situation, opting for the choice where Ciri is being demanded to relax is not a positive ending point. On the contrary, the second choice is voiced in a declarative mood, stating that the upcoming scene will definitely imply a situation where girls know how to exactly lift Ciri's spirit. To conclude, the socio-semiotic analysis have explored the implementation of the linguistic and multimodal semiotic resources in construing the narrative as a sequence of context of situations, creating cohesion through intermodal complementarity. In that manner, the semiotic moods of the game lead the player into partaking an active role construing the socio-semiotic activities that constitute the narrative. This goes in line with the way G 2007 puts it. Games represent their own semiotic domain, in that each game has been purposefully designed to communicate certain meaning to the player. Further, Sean 2019 elucidates, within any given digital game semiotics domain, the player takes on a role and becomes an agent, initiating and perpetuating the game's narrative. In the end, it is with no doubt that The Witcher 3 is a highly immersive role-playing and story-driven game, a game of choices and consequences, where each player as Geralt becomes the Witcher they aspire to be and leads Ciri, whom believe to be Geralt's destiny, to the fate they prepare her to. And that brings us to the end. Thank you so much for your interest and attention.